Happy Tuesday, everybody. Oh man, it's been an interesting week and it's barely started. Oh, we got people participating with the topic in chat too. This is great. So, I have tomorrow. I have like this interestingly busy day. First off, early in the morning, I have to take Shantoto in. She's getting her hip area X-rayed. It's been about 4 weeks or so since her second surgery. And I'll actually be posting a short probably tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. I'm not sure, just to show kind of like her progress. Hi, everybody coming over from Foxy's Fishes and Peplin. Welcome, welcome. Thank you. That's the first time I've seen that little notification because apparently I had something turned off. So YouTube is really good at like having its default settings be terrible for creators. And if you don't know what to dig for, ugh. Anyway, so yeah, after that, and then I have an interview with a small company, but it's like potentially really interesting. That's all about like 3D immersive experiences. So kind of metaverse, but not metaverse, if that makes sense. Yeah, interesting stuff that I'm going through right now, but we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, I'm going to jump into the topic actually relatively fast because I want this more to be like a open conversation between all of us here, and potentially, for those who are in the replay squad, be able to like use your comments and add to this conversation that we have in the stream, right? So I kind of came up with this because we're getting kind of close to the one convention I'm probably going to this year. There's a potential that I go to two, but it'll depend on new work and all that kind of stuff. But that being, of course, nobody in chat. Okay. Nobody. We all know, right? It's the Clash. Come on. I know chat's behind, so of course everybody's going to answer as I stalled for fun. No, but we're going to Keystone Clash this year, right? I'm speaking twice, participating in a panel event, and then maybe also judging. I'm going to be very busy there. My goal is to also try to go to Fishtoberfest, but I'm not like speaking or anything. But yeah. So as a part of this, because I don't go to a lot of conventions personally. I've been to two in the last year, and realistically I've been to like 4 total conventions. So the reasons that I go might be different than yours, but I want to, before I dive into like some of my reasons, I want to go straight to chat because there are some folks that are fantastic, like joining the conversation right off the kick. So Fishcapade said, location is first, speakers are second, everything else is just icing on the cake. So it's a matter of convenience. Similarly, it was mentioned before chat, and then I switched it to live chat, and that message like disappeared. And I don't know why, because, YouTube sucks. Sometimes when it comes to their chat feature. But a big part of it was just proximity. Gas for people that want to drive to conventions, especially with Fish, right? We're trying to take stuff home. And I remember this person's comment, it was like, the Fish first. If it's a convention centered around Fish that person's interested in, and then proximity was a big one because gas is so expensive right now, right? As a part of the pandemic and some of the other things, gas prices in the United States have just gone whoa, like that. And I know people that missed going to even like Triple Crown last year because just the cost of travel got too expensive. And I totally understand that. Like, travel is very expensive. And for those of us in the hobby, if we're going to look at a ton of money for travel, we might rather spend that money on like a new tank, new fish, whatever, right? It's a little tough to justify the travel when you're like, oh, I could get some really awesome fish for that much money. And in a hobby like ours, where that's the the focus, that can get really interesting. So from Kingfisher's Catch, I faced this question coming September. The king of DIY will be presenting at the Calgary Aquarium Society as a guest speaker. While he's not my favorite, it might still be good to mingle with like-minded people. Yeah, I think that's similar. There was the Fish Dig in Sacramento. I think that's the official name they used this year. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me, and I know you will. You know, they brought Joey down as their kind of primary attracting guest. And I know that from conversations I've had with some people that part of some people wanted to go because Joey was going to be there, and there were a group of people who did not want to go specifically for that reason. So that's interesting, right? Because speakers can be either interesting or not interesting to you as well. I think for some of us who are like hyper nerdy on our fish, maybe we're like very specialized. Like if you're a pleco person and a catfish-oriented convention doesn't have a really good pleco speaker you're interested in, that might be less appealing to you, right? I'm thinking of someone like my friend Alyssa, right? Or if you're like someone like me who's a rainbow fish person and they're like, oh, we're doing this convention and it's all like cichlid speakers. Well, I might not be as interested because there's nothing that's maybe up my particular fish keeping alley, right? So I think it's good to think about that, right? In general, I think if it's not hard to travel to, you never know. Some speakers might surprise you. And let me give you an example. So Spencer Jack spoke at Triple Crown. He was the speaker at the banquet. And I did not like his presentation at the banquet at all. I actually really, really disliked it. And I noticed that there were a number of people who walked out of the banquet as he was giving his talk. And to me, that's like, that shows people aren't super engaged. Spencer Jack was coming to my club to talk about a type of gymnogeophagus, right? So those are the geophaguses that get the kind of nuchal hump on them that are down in South America. And I was like, do I? And I was like, you know what? It's a fish species that's interesting to me. I find some of the earth eaters really interesting, even though I don't keep a lot of them. So I'll go. One of the best talks that I've seen probably in the last 3 to 4 years. So someone who I've seen give a talk before and I was really not high on. Went and saw him again. Amazing talk. Phenomenal talk. Had me very interested in that fish. And just in the concept of this country that, unlike a lot of other places, you don't have to go to these hard to get to crazy remote places. You basically could be like a fat out of shape person and go collecting in this country if you have some of the right connections, which is to say just the people that are in there that are into fish and they have a thriving fish club that works there in the country itself. And it's relatively drivable and all these things. It was like, okay, that's actually like super interesting and cool. And just he was very entertaining. Whereas I felt like at Triple Crown, I was just kind of like, this is kind of cringy, right? So I think to that regard, Kingfisher's Catch, my friend Joe, it might be worth just going, give him a shot. Cause maybe in a talk presentation, as opposed to YouTube, maybe it gets back to some of those, like I can say very frequently myself, like I find King of DIY's very early content where he's doing lots of DIY work, which even though I'm bad at that stuff, I find it fascinating to watch. Current content, couldn't care about it. Not interested. I found very little that interests me in the stuff he's done in the last 3 years, 4 years, but all his older content before that, I've watched tons of it, and I found it very interesting. So you never know. You might find something in his presentation that just like breaks through that. Here's the picture I've painted of this person. And maybe there's something that like, there'll be bits of information that you find super interesting or useful. Jeff Koski, not related to our topic, but still good. He sent me some video of his Bolivian rams that were protecting fry inside one of his tanks. And they're still doing good. They might have another pair pairing off, which is pretty awesome. Hopefully they don't They have plenty of territory and they don't fight, but really awesome to see like babies being raised up in a community type tank. I like seeing that kind of stuff. It's always good. Speaking of Alyssa Bentley, the subject of a particular fish convention, then I have to check if I actually can go to it with money and travel. Yeah, I think kind of picking on that travel thing again, like travel's expensive. So if it's so prohibitively expensive that you're like, I don't know if it's worth that kind of money, then totally makes sense to not go to one. Ken's 3D and Aquatics. I've never been to a fish convention, but I really want to. I want to be able to get fish I cannot get at my local fish store. And I think that's a great one, right? Previous comment in the chat was about like fish we can get, right? If you've watched, say, a great example of a creator that I love, who I've met in person at a convention, is Mike from the Fish Tank Barn, right? Live bearer, super specialist. He's really into like Godaids and some of your really uncommon and even very rare live bearers. And he picks up a lot of his super rare live bearers by going to these bigger conventions like the American Live Bearers Association, right? Where he can meet with other like-minded fish nerds who are bringing things to sell, whether it's out of their hotel room or if they have a table swap meet type thing going on. And that gives the opportunity to pick up fish he doesn't have that he's interested in, which I think that's a big, especially if you're in driving distance, right? That's a big appeal for a lot of us fish nerds, is the opportunity to get something we normally cannot find. Yeah, so one thing that I will say for me, relevant to my earlier comment from Paul Soltero, me neither. We walked out in the middle of his talk. His talk was basically based on, if you don't keep fish I approve of, you're keeping trash. Yeah, and I think I have a feeling he was intentionally kind of playing a little bit too much into a character, that like the kind of the cichlid mentality, because when he was presenting to my local club, really did not have that vibe. He made a couple like really small jokes, but it wasn't like continuous and over the top that like he's had previously, right? In that particular one at Triple Crown. So I think that was very interesting, at least to me, seeing that complete difference in his presentations, where one had me very disengaged and the other had me like fully focused in. He could have gone on for another hour and I would have been all for it. I wouldn't have like dropped interest whatsoever. Right. So I think it's interesting that kind of difference can occur with the same speaker, effectively speaking. So yeah, see some stories about certain other creators that we may or may have not have heard of with, friends of mine. Oh man, the things on the internet that happen. But for me, I look at it like this. I'm less interested in, especially having gone to the conventions I've gone to. So for refresh, I've gone to 2 Fishtoberfests. I spoke at one, went to the first one just for fun because it's close. It's like a 3.5 hour drive for me. That's easy peasy. I stay a night at a hotel. I hang out with fish nerds. I drive home. Awesome. Right? I went to Triple Crown, which that was kind of like the big cross-country trip. Also helped that while being in Kentucky, I could see a friend of mine who lives out there, so I extended my stay a little bit to hang out with my buddy. But still, I would have been there no matter what. That was really the convention I wanted to go to, especially because the pandemic killed off the Rainbow Fish Convention that was going to happen in Toronto, a year prior? Year and a half prior or so. And they basically had to delay until, I think it was late last year. And then I went to the AGA that was held here locally in the Seattle area. It was at a hotel that's literally like 15 minutes from my house. So of course I'm going to go to the AGA, right? It's my local club. It's 15 minutes from my house. I could drive home each night, sleep in my own bed, get back there in the morning, and do all the things I wanted to do. But you'll notice a pattern in those, right? These are smaller conventions in the sense that they're more focused on hobbyists and less like trade shows, right? Because there used to be the big aquatic experience, used to be the big thing everybody wanted to go to, but that's kind of a giant trade show that we also get to go to. Nowadays, what's kind of taken over that slot is all the Aquashellas. I'm still interested in going to an Aquashella so I can be there in person and get that experience, mostly because so many people attend it. But for me, when the presentation side of things is basically way more brands being like, look at all our amazing products, I'm like, I don't know that I care that much. Aquascaping competitions are interesting, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'm the target audience for those, because very often, and thankfully I don't see him here, but like, Grant, especially at Garden of Eater, who, I've met him in person, wonderful dude. He and Shelby do all the aquascaping competitions, right? They travel around to a bunch of them. I remember people showing me aquascapes at, I think it was not at Triple Crown, it was at Fishtoberfest, right? And they were asking me what I thought. And there was one that came up and I'm like, that person's trying way too hard. And they were like, that's Grant's aquascape, Bentley. And I'm like, now I feel like a jerk. And I believe Kenny E immediately messaged Grant to let him know that was my feedback. because that's my friendship with Kenny. But it's one of those things where, like, an aquascaping competition is, I'm not much of an aquascaper, right? So that's not going to draw me in. I'm very specialized into mostly rainbow fish. So if there's not something kind of rainbow fishy there, yeah, I'm a little less likely to be dialed in. What really gets me to conventions are good speakers and knowledge, especially if a certain set of people that are in, that are the regulars like you folks in chat that maybe I haven't got an opportunity to meet, and you're in that area. If I know, like, an example, Keystone Clash has been on my radar for a little bit. And especially after Scotty contacted me, it was like, hey, we'd love to have you come out and be a speaker. I was like, I'm in, right? Just because I know there's a lot of people that live in that area and travel to Keystone Clash, that will just give me an opportunity to meet a lot of people I haven't been able to meet. And for me, the biggest aspect of any convention, and this has been like this to conventions of other hobbies I have that have nothing to do with fish, is the social aspect. I love sitting down with similar minded people in my hobby, right? In this case, it's like other fish nerds, and just babbling about fish. Or even just like not necessarily. So like in the case of other fish tubers, I love sitting down and talking to my fellow creators, not necessarily about like, how do you get better views on YouTube, but more just like, what's your story? What got you into not just fish, but brought you to that side of making fish related content on YouTube, right? I love hearing people's stories. You guys know, like, I love telling people's stories on my channel when I get an opportunity to. Pretty soon we'll be doing one with Eurofish, Peter, who, fantastic dude. He's dealing with some family stuff right now, so we've kind of had to delay our original plan. But once he's good to go, we'll be doing that. Or like Jason at Redfish Bluefish, right? Somebody I met at AGA for the first time, became friends with him, and then when he opened a store, I was like, dude, I have to tell your story. Like, what kind of crazy person opens a fish store in the middle of the pandemic? I have to tell that story, right? So being able to sit down with other people, or maybe the best example is like when I sat down with Biggs, Chris Biggs, right? The mad aquarist himself at Triple Crown. And just the things that come out of that crazy man's head and out of his mouth when he's talking. And you can't help but just like laugh. But he's also so informative, right? Meeting people like that, being able to sit down and have those kind of conversations and maybe catch them on camera, especially in my case, they're so fantastic, right? And that's the big part of the experience for me. I love being able to do those things. So like an example, if I ever get to go to New York, Omar, who's in chat, right? We're talking about somebody who took over a fish store from somebody who'd run a fish store for years. He had worked at that fish store for a while. Like, what's the story? What possesses a person to be like, I'm going to take over this fish store because the owner's willing to sell it, and I want to keep doing this. I want to keep selling fish to other crazy fish people like me. Like, what possesses a person to do that? Like, how did they get down the path to becoming a fish store owner? Or in the case of some of our creators who maybe don't talk about what brought them to that place, telling those stories. I love that stuff. Gardaki's Playground. I'm super antisocial as an Aquarius. If you're at any convention where I am there, please come say hi. I don't care if you're antisocial. I'm one of the most open people in the world. I love talking to people. You have to come say hi. Because I love meeting people. And that's the biggest appeal for me at fish conventions. Got a lot of people in here. It's like, speakers, proximity, those are big ones. And I totally get that. But if I'm only going to go to, say, like one convention a year, which has kind of become my plan outside of basically Fishtoberfest, as long as my schedule lines up, because it's so close to me, I'm not as worried about going to like one good one. For me, the proximity stops mattering until we start talking like international travel. That's a little rough, right? But for me, it's more about like, what unique experience or group of people do I get to meet? And that's the more important part. The groups of people I have the potential to meet. People that I've talked with online. An example, when I went to Triple Crown, I've talked to Marcel in the past a couple of times online. I talked to a gentleman named D, who's like if you're sitting inside the like Rainbow Fish sphere, you know who D is, right? If you're in Rainbow Fish Live on Facebook, you know who D Brown is. Of course, I know Gary, but then also like Johannes Graf was there, and I've interfaced with Johannes a little bit, but I've never met him in person. So getting to meet some of these people and talk to them in person, that's the appeal to me. But I'm a super social crazy person, right? I'm one of those very extroverted people where a lot of my hobbies become my hobbies because there's some social aspect about it that I love. Playing, like, as an example, before getting back into fish, I played a lot of Magic the Gathering. Tons of it. Played competitively, all that kind of stuff, right? Don't do very much of that anymore, but the big thing is the parts of Magic I miss have nothing to do with the game itself. It has everything to do with the groups of people I would hang out with, talk, and have fun with. It's the social side of those things that interest me the most. In fish, it's kind of similar, although parts of having fish in my home, even keeping an effectively empty tank running temporarily, there's like one fish in here I still got to catch, but keeping tanks going is peaceful at home, right? I can sit and stare at a fish tank and just be like, I'm going to have a few Zen moments. I'm just going to watch my fish swim. I'm going to look at my plants, see how they're growing, speaking of the fish that's in there. But I get so much more enjoyment when I go visit some of my fish nerd friends, or I go to a club meeting, or maybe I go out to like some small event locally, like a swap or something like that, or maybe even like something like Fishtoberfest. I get an opportunity to just talk to people about something we all love. And even if you're like one of those people who thinks that Oscars are the best fish in the world, you weird mutants, yeah, I'm talking about you, KG Tropicals. But it's like that mutual love that we have, even if we don't like the exact same things, that passion that is present is the thing that draws me into conventions. And I'm so curious. Like, an example would have been if I could have made it out to Dan's Fish for that barbecue in July. Oh, dude, I'd have been in heaven, because I would have been hanging out with a bunch of other nerds. I'd have got to see this awesome facility that I've seen on video lots of times. I get to hang out with Dan, who I've had an opportunity with to hang out with him a couple of times now, and I love Dan to death. But more importantly, I'd have got to meet somebody like Johnny, who I haven't got to hang out with, right? And that would be the thing that would be the icing on the cake, so to speak. Oh no, insane. Hi, Bentley. I named my male bristlenose Pleco after you. I can't even say Pleco. Jeez. Why would you want to name it after me? I can't even say the name. I mean, I kind of have some bristles, right? Not much, because I definitely come from genetics that are not good at growing facial hair. This is literally all I can grow. Is this spot? Everything else is just non-existent. But thank you. I'm kind of honored. I find it more interesting when people have um, one of the things that I've always found the most interesting is the number of people who have also had dojo loaches that they have also named Danger Noodle before or after any of the videos that involved my Danger Noodle, right? That's the people have like the same mindset to have the same name for their fish. I love it, man. Those are the parts of this hobby that like just suck me in immediately and get me like now. I mean, I'm laughing at myself like a complete dope talking to you wonderful people who are spending your summer evening with some crazy person on the internet, right? how can anything like that be like bad when we all love this hobby so much that we're like, good weather, nah. Evening I could be outside doing something else, nah. I'm gonna babble about fish on the internet with this crazy psycho in Seattle. It's so good. All right. Get back to normal, right? Cake. Oh, who's got cake? That's not fair. That's not fair. Anyway, if you do have other questions outside of the conversation that is a part of this whole like what makes you go to a fish convention, at Bentley Pasco makes it super easy for me to see your comments. I'm going to make sure I didn't miss a few. But yeah. Oh wait, Gardaki's playground. I work for the Midwest's largest aquarium, yet I don't tell my coworkers I have 5 habitats at home. Are you worried about being judged about like how scientifically accurate they are? Because that's what I would be like. They would be like, I see that. Did I say cake? Oh man, it's all my fault. All right, like, what do you mean it's not a biotope? How dare you? Nabokov fan, I owe you an email. I have one thing I desperately need your help with who to contact at GSAS for speakers. I can put you in touch. Yeah, shoot me an email, Nabokov fan. I'll put you in touch with our speaker coordinator, Mark. But I need to, just as a preface, I need to be able to talk to Mark first, just to make sure he's okay. So basically, let me know why you need to talk to him, and then I should be able to. He's a pretty awesome guy. I'm sure he'll be like, yeah, send him my way, you know. But still. And a new revolutionary product, eh? New fish food. I'm like drowning in fish food at my house right now. I have so much fish food. It's all like extreme stuff that they've had me testing lately. Oh, MNC Aquatics. I'm not antisocial, so society is anti-me. Oh, Lord. This is how you know my brain is just like on overload lately from all the like 8 billion interviews I've had to do. But yeah. Keystone Clash people started getting excited about this year's Clash before last year's was over. Oh man. I will say like there's a stark difference in like the speakers last year to this year, right? There's a big focus on YouTube creators as opposed to like legitimate scientists, which, you know, maybe there needs to be a better balance of that. Because some of us are just like crazy loons on the internet, not necessarily that good at what we do. but we all love the hobby, and I think that's what makes for the entertainment. Spreading the bow virus up here is my mission. Kingfisher sketch. You're doing the work. It's kind of like it's not our Lord and Savior. He's more like our Indiana Jones, but like Gary Lang, right? Just slowly spreading more and more rainbow fish psychosis across the country. Whoa, hold on. Johnny's spilling some info. We are looking at receiving fish from Canadian hobbyists. Shipping to Canada is pretty easy for Dan's Fish, but we're not sure about the other way around. That's awesome. Man, I need to talk to Dan soon. Thankfully, I'm going to see him sometime in September, which probably means I actually need to go and finish all of my presentations for my talks. I need to do that, especially before I start my new job. Because I'm going to be super busy for the first like month and a half of whichever new job I end up with, and that's going to be rough. But yeah. MNC Aquatics, you were right about that rainbow I asked you about. It was a female goiter river. Sometimes I get them right, man. Sometimes I'm completely wrong. There was enough hallmarks there, especially like looking at the finnage is the big thing. As you look at more and more rainbows, especially the differences between some of the Australian rainbows and the Papua rainbows, you notice some little telltale signs to determine gender in the finnage. You typically get that like strong point in the fins versus a rounded fin in the Australian rainbows, as males having the point, rounded fins being more female. That's not universally the case in a lot of the Papuan rainbows. So when it comes to a lot of like your trifasciatas and stuff that are more common in Australia, it's a little easier to tell the male female apart. But yeah, I'm never perfect. I just like guess sort of well. Omar, I hope to one day host you here at my store. Dude, that would be so sick. I want everyone who opens a fish store, and we talked about this last week of like what are the success factors in fish stores nowadays, or at least like what seem to be the patterns. I sincerely hope that every fish store out there gets to the level of success to where they can do that kind of thing. Like occasionally bring in a guest speaker that their local community is interested in seeing, especially if you don't have like clubs. And if you do have clubs, making that partnership so that they can come in, talk to the club, do an event maybe at the store, do all those wonderful community things that are amazing, right? That would be so sweet to see happen more in the US. I know that there's a lot more of that in Europe, where some of the European stores, Green Aqua is like probably the best example because we see it more actively on YouTube, where they bring in and do these fantastic like aquascaping demos with these world-renowned masters of aquascaping. But there's other stuff like that too, where they bring in people that can travel. And granted, travel in Europe's a lot easier than some of the other places out there, like the US or Canada potentially. But seeing those things where these awesome people that are established in the hobby for one reason or another, going to something like a local store and putting on a small event so that your local customers and other hobbyists can come interact with the store. Often it can drive some sales for the store, which is really nice. But more importantly, just that those big community building events that show like, hey, we're more than just like here to try and make money. We just love this hobby, right? Those are the things that I find really wonderful about like a potential optimistic future of what like the new age local fish store can look like. Maybe I'm just like a ridiculous optimist. I don't know. MNC Aquatics, whenever I get my building built, I'll have plenty of tanks for breeding. I have 145 total, but we'll have room for way more. You're starting to sound like Lucas. Fish tank hoarder. That's a lot of tanks, man. 145. I mean, I'm assuming a lot of those are smaller, right? So like for me, I'm not as stressed about like the number of tanks because most of mine will be like whenever I can build mine in my garage, right? Will be 40-gallon breeders. But I'm also very focused, right? So it's like, okay, I'm going to breed like 3-4 species of rainbow at a time for probably a year. And then I'm going to move and rotate into breeding a different species. Unless a particular species is like super popular with like locals or whatever I set up in the future, right? Those are my goals. Those are my goals because I'm a simple person. I just like having bigger tanks. I love the 40-gallon breeder. So I'll skip 10 gallons and 20 gallons all day long to just have 40-gallon breeders everywhere. Because that's my life, man. I love certain tanks. And when I love something, I stick to it. Cup fan. I'll pass the details, explain with words and things. Perfect. How goes the project with moving things around? That's a good follow up question. Got a little delayed. As what do you expect with me, right? Delays. My life is delays. So I'm trying. I have to go. Uh, my local tractor supply company, like for some reason, didn't have safety Zorb for a while. And the next closest one is like a 2-hour drive away, and I wasn't gonna do 2 hours of driving just for like one bag of safety Zorb. So I kind of like shoved some things off, which was like one of the main things. I need safety Zorb and a tarp so I can wash a lot of things. It's back in stock now, so I need to go like move my butt down there and get it and stop putting things off. I've also been in like a whirlwind of interviews the last 2 weeks. Last Friday, I had an interview with a VP of a company. He's the VP of quality engineering for a very large firm. So, he was talking to me about a potential position that is kind of high up the chain in the grand scheme of things for compared to say, most of my previous experience, I'm leading like teams. This would be leading like multiple teams. So that's, a little daunting because it does have like some travel built into it and things like that. Nothing too crazy. It's not like I'm going to be traveling all over the country, but more like, yeah, I'm going to have to, a couple days here and there, I'm going to have to be not going somewhere completely different and running this larger test firm for another fairly large company that's all contract. And then I have other interviews with this smaller startup company, but I would be the very first tester in the door. And basically, like, as they expand, I get to grow test out the way I want to grow test out. And because it's a smaller company, I've been interviewing with multiple people in that small company because there's big things that small companies, right? You want to make sure that they fit your early culture and they really are the exact right person for the job. So those have kept me pretty busy between preps and interviews and all the other things associated with that kind of work. I mentioned last week that like on Monday alone, I'd been contacted by over 30 recruiters, all for the exact same role. So I've had some other kind of wild days like that in the last few days that have eaten up some of my time. But what do I need to do? The space between my two racks where my little 29-gallon acrylic was is so weirdly dimensioned that it's hard to figure out what to put there, other than like a 29-gallon tank or like a 20 long, which seems boring. But I need to talk to brother-in-law James because I think we might move a 20 long there, just because that's kind of something he's interested in, and let him aquascape that tank. Right, so it's talking about him, kind of figuring out those things and getting prepped for that. The one I'm doing with my wife, we've had a bunch of like medical appointments and things like that have eaten up time. That's slowly kicking the can down the road, so to speak. But I'm trying to get a little bit more stuff done this week, and especially before I get like a start date from whichever company is going to hire me here soon. I'm supposed to like have an offer in writing relatively soon from one, so that's nice. I've been told they're going to send me an offer, so that feels good. Right, I'll be back to work, but in that interval of time, I need to get like a bunch of fish stuff done before I'm crazy busy again. So yeah, basically, I'm hoping this weekend and maybe part of Thursday to get a bunch of stuff done, so that I can get back on track of what I want to do in that room before everything starts going really crazy around here. Yellowstone Aquatics, are you coming to Dan's? I would love to for the like that barbecue thing or any of the other things that Dan's would do, unless you mean like coming to work for Dan. In that case, no, I'm not coming to work for Dan. I will fully admit, at one point, I don't think he minds anymore, but 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I actually talked to Dan about potentially working for him. And just the unfortunate part is because of the particular like situation I have with my wife and her disabilities and things like that. I have some kind of higher salary requirements than Dan could afford at the time, right? And I think, realistically speaking, if I'm going to be honest, the things that Dan was interested in having me do, I have a feeling there are better people out there for it. And I want nothing more than to see Dan have success. Because I love everything Dan is doing. And Dan, the person, is a wonderful person. So his business being successful, to me, is more important than like any way that I could fit in that picture. Other than if Dan ever wants my advice on anything, he will get it for free. Because I sincerely believe in his mission and what he's trying to do to change the way that like the fish hobby receives their fish, in the sense of the way that the distribution chain exists currently compared to how Dan is doing it. I believe very firmly in like what he's doing. So I will happily help Dan in any way that I can in my limited capacity for free, because I want to see his business do well. And I want to see that impact other parts of our hobby and make it better. Because in the end, what he's doing is, I believe, better for us, the customer, on the end. So, yeah. But if you mean like ever going out to Dan's, I would love to go out to Dan's. Just to hang out, whether it was an event or even just to go out there and film. Would love to do that. I'm a little jealous of Bob, because Bob's gone out there like twice. Bob Steenfot, that is, right? And I'm a little jealous of that. I won't lie. Mickey M. Lots of pet store chains over here are dropping the aquarium and fish section of their stores. It's harder to keep profitable, I guess, but opening up some options for LFSs to survive, I hope. I think part of it is the larger chain stores have to balance so many things, and fish in particular is a hobby that is less dependent on the sales of the dry goods that are what make a lot of the profit in, like, dogs and cats, right? And you don't really have like fish toys like you do for dogs and cats. Right, so just the way that the business is structured is so much different for fish. And I think when you're in a big box store, that the way to do that successfully doesn't fit into like the very small area they leave for their aquatic sections. And it works so much better for like dogs and cats and even some of your small animals, and potentially even some reptiles, just because it's very easy to do those things very compact. But I don't think that works well for fish, where I think honestly fish, with some small exceptions, like there are obviously big stores in Germany and even like Big Al's as an example in Canada that do their fish sections very well. Not so much the US. The US is like really bad at their big box stores when it comes to fish. There are some, like, don't get me wrong, there's like going to be a PetSmart or a Petco somewhere where they have a super dedicated hobbyist that works there and makes that place wonderful. But that's few and far between and not the norm, unfortunately. Whereas we're seeing more and more, especially now with some of these... I just saw... Presto John, I just saw your message. How dare you, sir? Anyway, we're seeing these newer breeds of stores. Folks like Omar, who are super dedicated hobbyists, or Jason at Redfish Bluefish, of course, Corey at Aquarium Co-op. These people who understand that like the store of old will not be successful now, and that the way that the fish store experience has had to change to be successful. And I think as we see more and more of that happening, right, the more modern fish store, local fish store that we're seeing that is successful, I think that's going to be where the big box stores will just slowly walk away from fish, because the way that they're designed to make their profit does not work that well with fish. It works phenomenally well with like grooming services, dry goods for dogs and cats, toys for dogs and cats, right? It's great for that experience. It's not so good for the way that fish need to be done successfully, especially because they work off these kind of old systems and they work through these huge distribution chains that don't have the time to quarantine, let the fish rest and come back to health. It's about fast turnover, right? And that just doesn't work. That we see that more and more. It just, you get those horror stories of like, I went into, big box store X, or like the old days of Walmart selling fish when it was just like a horror show every time you went in. So seeing that change, I think, is good in the long term for us fish keepers, because if we get more dedicated and nice stores for our fish, we're going to have less problems with fish. New hobbyists are going to have better sources of information. They're going to have better sources of fish, which will lead to more success. And I think a lot of reasons why newer hobbyists drop out of the hobby is maybe they go to a Petco, or maybe they go to a PetSmart, or they go to some other store that can't give them necessarily the best information. And they find this hobby interesting, but they struggle and they struggle and they struggle, and they're tired of struggling. But if we get to specialist stores, especially with very dedicated, wonderful hobbyist mentality type people that have good customer service skills, right? You have to have good customer service. Unfortunately, that's just part of owning a retail establishment. I think that's where we're going to see this like shift, and we can slowly see better and better and better success for new hobbyists, which grows that hobby, right? I think it's a good thing. I think it opens opportunities for those that are willing to go through the trouble, because it is hard to open a fish store. It's a lot of work. I cannot tell you, I've talked to 2 different people who have opened fish stores recently, and in the end, like 4 different people who've opened a fish store. And in every case, they're always like, yeah, I thought it would only take me, a couple weeks, and it'd be this, that, and the other thing. And then all of a sudden I'm like 2 months in, and I'm still trying to get stuff set up the way I really want it. And it was way more work than I thought. And it's like, yeah, to do it right, it's tough. It's a lot of work. And especially if you're trying to do it on your own, you don't have help. That's some hard work. But I think the people that go through it and truly care are going to make great fish stores in the end, right? And I think that's nothing but a positive for our hobby. Especially if we start seeing more, I don't want to say this because I don't want to be like other operations like Dan's Fish, but what I mean is more like people like Dan who are trying to disrupt the old ways of the hobby for the sake of not only the fish, but the hobbyist's end experience, right? I think those are huge benefits to us as fish keepers, whether we're like integral to the business, like Johnny who works for Dan, or like Yellowstone Aquatics who works for Dan, versus, like crazy people like me who are just like, I'm just your customer and I'm a fan, and I'll happily throw my money your way. Johnny at Dan's Fish says, I don't see how opening an LFS is viable this day and age. I can tell you 2 stories so far, very successful, that have opened stores within the last 3 years. And then a third one that is, I think their store is like 4 years old, which would be Pisces Aquarium down in Oregon. There are definitely ways to be successful, but it's not the way that the old school fish store was done. Absolutely not. But it's also not the exact same story of someone like Corey, right? You don't have to, you don't have to have like this massive engine of YouTube. You don't have to have a massive YouTube channel to be successful. And keep in mind, Corey's YouTube channel was tiny in the grand scheme of things compared to his store, but he knew how to use YouTube to increase his business. But not everybody needs to do that. Jason at Redfish Bluefish as an example, right? He has his like focus niche. He's really good at certain things, especially like dwarf cichlids, pistogrammas. He's doing very, very good in his business. Doesn't do really any social media anymore. and he's continued to grow his business. And I know some of like the kind of, I guess you would say, like inside baseball into how well he's doing. His business is doing enough to where he could just run his business if he wanted to, and not also work his tech job at the same time. But the tech job has great benefits, so he keeps those. Because he's got a wife and kids. He's got to take care of. Tony Adams, I don't see the point of opening an LFS these days. I think I would be better off just doing what I plan on doing, breeding and selling fish to stores like Dan. So, okay. Different conversation, kind of what we had last week, but I still think it's interesting, right? I think it depends on the person, right? So someone like you, Tony, who would rather focus on breeding, and I've talked to another person like this too, it's perfectly fine. If you can make that viable and you're not worried about like, if you want your hobby to be profitable, but not necessarily like your entire career, if that makes sense. I think there's nothing wrong with interfacing with a good store, working with them, breeding your fish, doing the things you like, work and adding those things to make your hobby pay for itself and become profitable. Right? But I can give you examples of people who are trying to do different that are very successful. So like Shrimpy Business, right? Someone that I've interviewed, Nick, wonderful person. He quit a chemical engineering job. That's a job that makes good money to pursue his dream, and he's doing phenomenal business. It's all about like what you, the person, find that best fits you. Like for you, it might be like, I'd rather just breed. I've got a big basement, or maybe I've got a side building on my property or whatever it may be, and I can breed really well. I don't want to worry about shipping and all that crazy stuff. And what happens if something ends up dead going to my customer, where if I just ship it to a place like Dan takes care of all that stuff. Do I make a little less money? Yeah, but I don't have all that hassle. So I get to do it easy and simple and enjoy the part of my hobby while still making some money and being part of a business, right? I think there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm in a similar sort of kind of thing where, like, when I do sell fish, I'm selling them to a local store. I'm selling them to my friend, Jason at Redfish Bluefish, and then he's taking care of the rest so that other people who want my fish can get them through him. Now, granted, it's only my guppies right now, but we've talked about the potential future of other fish because he's local to me and easy, right? I think it's all about your person. What to you is the right balance? Because some people, right, some people are like me. They're super extroverted. They love talking to people, and they want that retail brick and mortar experience. And there are other people who are not like that, who are just like, I love my hobby. I don't know that I want to open a store, but I can make money off my hobby. I know I can. Right? Easy. Perfect for, like, an example of your giving is perfect for that kind of person. Omar. I hope that makes sense, Tony, what I'm trying to get at. I think it's depending on each person, right? The people who really want to open a local fish store, I think if they look at the right examples, can absolutely have success. But Omar's hitting on this. LFS is not an easy task for anyone. You have to love what you do. You have to love the fact that you need to live a customer service life. And you know it's going to be a ton of work. You might not make millions of dollars, but you can have success and live a good life. It's just not easy, and it takes a lot of work. But for some people, that part of that work and that customer interaction and doing those things is the very fulfilling part of doing that, right? Where for some of us are more maybe dedicated hobbyists, we might not care so much about that, but like being able to like make some money with our hobby that we love very much, selling to someone else, maybe like it's Dan, or maybe it is a local store like Omar's, or Jason at Redfish Bluefish, Fish Room ABQ, right? Like even said it, Fish Room Albuquerque. I own my own LFS out of New Mexico, opened up a little over 2 years ago, right? Maybe it is find a local store or find someone like Dan that you can work with and still make some kind of business out of it, but it doesn't have to be customer facing. It's all dependent on each individual person. Some people want to be able to retire and open up their own fish store and have that be their dream, right? Jeff Kane. That's his retirement dream. Then there are people like me who are like, I like fish. I never want to open a store. I would never want to open or run a fish store. As much as I love people, that's not the part of the hobby I like. And for me, in this, and kind of touch on this a little bit, Kingfisher's Catch is like, that's a can of worms. What are your thoughts, philosophy on someone turning their hobby into a business? For me personally, if my hobby becomes my business, it stops becoming my hobby. And I'm worried that I will lose my love for the fish keeping hobby if I were ever to truly turn it into a business. That's why, like, I don't go crazy on YouTube and like try to make it my career, right? I am very happy with it being my side hobby because I'm not worried about falling out of love with it, if that makes sense. Like, there are times when like I'll be frustrated. Do not get me wrong. But yeah, I think it depends on each person. My personal philosophy, I would never want to open a fish store because I don't want my hobby to become my business. But for other people, Omar's a great example, right? He is so passionate about this hobby that he wants it to become his life's work. It's all about the person, right? I think it all absolutely has to do with the person. Look at Dan, right? Dan's Fish. He left a good job. He was said he was doing it as a hobby. Big dreams of running this larger scale business with the same idea and all those things, right? It's all dependent on the person. All dependent on the person. You can make a living, but it's hard work opening a fish store. And it can be similar, even selling to like local fish stores. Dean's an example, right? Dean is a phenomenal breeder. He sells to a number of local fish stores who are willing to carry some of his different fish, but he would never want to open his own fish store. But he's kind of in that space that like Tony wants to be. I want to work with stores. Maybe I work with somebody like Dan, sell my fish, all those kind of things, but I'm not looking to open my own fish store, right? And still can make their hobby profitable in some way, shape, or form. And for me, I'm kind of like, I don't care about none of those things. My hobby's my hobby because I'm a weirdo. Mickey saying LFS with a coffee shop or cafe next thing. That could be interesting. Fish store and bar. Who knows? That might be a dangerous mix though. But yeah, somebody will find something like the way that I think about that is like cat cafes, right? They're super popular in Japan, and there's like, a number of different like X cafes that involve some kind of animal. I'm sure there's like a room somewhere where you could do like a fish cafe where like there's like fish tanks under the tables or, just all the walls are fish tanks so you get to enjoy things. And maybe you also sell fish out of the side or something. Who knows? I'm sure there's room to do that somewhere. And the first person opens it, I will be happy to visit if I ever get a chance. Oh, man. Okay, let me see here. I want to make sure there was one question from Tony as well that I want to answer real fast. We're getting close to time, so we'll have to do this the speed version. Before I forget, I've been dying to ask you a question for weeks. Is it possible to make your substrate too fertile for plants? Interesting question. Okay, so kind of. And let me preface this. It would have to be both the substrate and the water column having too much nutrition, because then what ends up being is an imbalance and algae takes over. Realistically, most of your substrates have a cation exchange capacity. We call that CEC, right? And that's just the capacity it has to pull in nutrients, especially as they're being used. But once it's at capacity, it's not going to keep pulling more and more in. Now, granted, you could have layers of mulm that are mixed into your substrate, and those break down, they become inert, but they also provide some level of nutrition. But you would have to have something really crazy to have too many nutrients that actually becomes problematic for your plants. They're only going to feed so much, and unless you're creating some kind of anoxic condition where the roots are, or anaerobic, because plant roots need oxygen, right? They need to be in some form of aerobic condition. If for some reason it got like so packed with mulm on top of all the other nutrients inside that now low or no oxygen is getting to the roots of the plants, I think that's the only case where you'd actually see a problem. Or it's like there's so much nutrition but not enough actual like plant mass that has roots into the substrate to absorb some of that stuff. Then you might have issues. But realistically, I mean, the answer is kind of like no, but theoretically yes. And this is as not a scientist whatsoever, just some idiot who loves plants on the internet. I have no authority on this whatsoever, but I can't really see a realistic scenario where that would occur. Because I have a number of tanks where I'm sure I have like the mulm death layer in my substrate, but I also have tons of like crypts in those tanks, and they're just like, love life, best ever, all the nutrients we could ever need, just gonna do great. And I've also got plants that don't have a ridiculous amount of stuff, so, but I don't see like negative impact to my plant health other than like, I probably need to trim some of those plants that are in there so that it's not quite a mess. I hope that helps, Tony. But yeah, I mean, I could see a theoretical thing where you could say, well, yes, if you do X, Y, and Z, then it could become a negative. But I just don't see that realistically occurring without seeing other negative effects in the water column happening before the substrate would become an issue. I hope that makes sense. Leo209, my buddy, Planet Question, lowered my co-op light to an 80 intensity, raised the CO2 a little, dosing 2 a week of Easy Green, still getting hair algae on plants. So my first question would be size of tank. My second question would be how long the light is on for the day. What I have been finding is with my hair algae battle in Fallen Forest, if I'm not consistent with my nutrients and I had too much or too little light to make the plants happy, with CO2 it would cause problems. And then when I've had CO2 not running in the tank because like the Neo diffuser popped off of the thing again, and maybe I missed it for a day or two, is when I'll start seeing the algae like kind of take over again because I've got the same level of nutrients going in the grand scheme of things. If I'm being like not paying enough attention, or I'm running too fast, which is more what it has been, but not the amount of CO2 to uptake those excess nutrients by boosting the plant's ability to process, right, with all the extra carbon. Now, that being said, my first guess is like, maybe it's still too much light for the size of the tank, and we need to dial the light down more, or the duration the light is on is too long, and we need to rein that in a little bit. So maybe if the light's on for like 10 hours, we need to bring it down to like 7, as an example. I mean, you've got the bat phone for me, Leo, so if you want to give me some extra details after stream, I'll see what I can do to help debug your situation, as it were. Whole tank is now a Fluval Biostratum. Interesting. Preston John, 106.2 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Fish are still alive. 91 Fahrenheit outside tank with a fan blowing on it. Good Lord. Yeah, I mean, it has been hot in Arizona, which is where I know you are. I've got my friend who I used to work with at Amazon who recently moved down there, I think like 9 months ago now. And he's been complaining to me about like the 118 degree days while he was trying to get me to move down there. I'm like, this is the example of where I don't want to move down there, bud. It was just like ludicrously hot. Oh, Alyssa, I'm now behind. I know I'm behind, but I just wanted to mention, excuse me, that it bugged me a little when people tell me I should open a fish store. It just sounds like stress. I guess it's because you work in a fish store and like you're already doing a bunch of stuff on your own that like they think, oh, you'd just be great to open a fish store. And it's like, nah, I'm at the right level of like in a fish store, but also not the stress of ownership. Totally get that. Because that's its own stress, right? There's its own stress running a fish store too. How many watts is a Fluval full power? Depends on the size. So keep in mind that like watt per gallon doesn't matter with LED. That's an old like fluorescent tube measurement and not necessarily the most accurate thing in the world. But like the 48-inch Fluval Plant 3.0 is 53 or 56 watts. I think it's 53. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, right? Whereas the 36 is, I think, 48 watts, 46 watts. It's something like 5 to 6 less. I mean, these are all things you can look up. By the way, they're out there on Fluval's site about the wattage of each one. But it just depends on the size. It's a little less watts the smaller they get, more watts the bigger they get, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the most is like 56 watts or 53 watts, one of the two. Yeah. Yeah. Hope that helps. All right. Make sure I didn't mention anything real crazy. Leo29, if you do go to Fishtoberfest, we can have a drink. Yeah, I'm going to try and make it at least like, I'm at least going to come down and hang out a little bit on Fishtoberfest for the weekend. I just don't know the extent of how much I'll be down there. It might be only like one day. Just because it depends on new job. That's really what it comes down to. A new employer will dictate how much time I can take off being fresh into a job in September, given that the week before is Keystone Clash, and I need to take at least like 3 days off for that particular one. So yeah. Maybe. I'll try to make it down there at least a day. I might make a day trip where I leave like super early in the morning Saturday, come down for a little while, and then drive back up or something. Or maybe stay the night and then drive back up early Sunday. I'll figure something out. But yeah, all of these be at Fishtoberfest for like probably a day. As long as my wife doesn't yell at me. I doubt she will, but you know how it is. Bring a good bottle to celebrate the new job. Oh, thanks, man. I've got plenty of my own. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. All right, there's one last thing I wanted to say. Hold on. Oh, there we go. From Von Lurker. Great name. Will Kamaka's crossbreed with Bosemani? Yes, they can. Is it super likely? No, but yes, they can. They're both a Melanitania, so they can crossbreed and have fertility. So if you're trying to breed and they're in the same tank, you'll want to separate them to different tanks. All right. My friends, I want to thank you all for being here, being a part of the conversation. It was really fun kind of talking about what makes a fish convention interesting to us collectively. For those of you who are here in the replay squad, let me know in the comments down below. What are your priorities if you're going to a fish convention? What are the things that are most interesting and make you want to go to this convention over that convention? Or just in general, like, this is the thing that makes me want to go to a fish convention, and these are the things that make me not want to go to a fish convention. I want to hear your feedback in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.